social behavioral change has been a big talking point and a thorny issue for Cabinet since the easing of lockdown regulations. In his address just 2 days ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa chastised people who ignored lockdown regulations, abused alcohol and, in fact, were part of social gatherings. He also said that the wearing of masks is now mandatory. Garth Japhet is a medical doctor driven by a passion to transform behavior through storytelling and a social behavior change expert. He has successfully managed one of the world's leading campaigns for public health education through Heartlines. He says behavioral change is in fact needed and joins us now via Zoom from Cape Town this morning. Garth, thanks very much for making time and welcome to the AM report. So on the face of it, it appears that there's heaps of evidence suggesting best practice to how we should be responding to this pandemic. But even in the face of that, there are some people who, I guess, want to get locked in very heated arguments about ways through which we should move forward. Is this an act of defiance or sheer ignorance? What's your take?
Thanks so much. I think it's. I don't think we can say with certainty that it's either. I think one of the things we've learned also around Soul City for many years is that until you actually find out from people themselves, to assume you know why people are doing what they're doing is wrong. However, I doubt whether it's just an act of defiance. I think there is a group of people who probably say, look, who is the government to tell me what to do? But I suspect that it's probably a little bit more complicated than that. I think, number one is masks are uncomfortable. I wear glasses. They steam up. There is another thing I think there is a big group of our population, a little bit like it is with HIV/AIDS, which is it's not going to happen to me. And because this is an invisible virus, we're not yet seeing huge numbers of people actually around us getting ill. Particularly young people are saying it's not going to happen to me. So I think ignorance is probably quite low down on the list, and defiance is probably a small proportion. But I suspect those other two, it's uncomfortable and it's not going to happen to me, are probably the two leading reasons. But I would very much want to find out before I made any huge assumptions.
And whatever we find, obviously, will have a big bearing on the type of campaigns that government and many other organizations should, in fact, be focusing on. The impression I get from where I'm sitting is that there's a lot of talking across one another as opposed to addressing those very real concerns in some respects that you've alluded to. One of them being a concern which I'll be the first to admit has gained a lot of traction in other areas in the world, including the US. This issue around masks actually hampering your ability to breathe and stifling you from getting the type of oxygen intake you need in your body. I haven't seen any campaign, for instance, addressing that particular issue in the hopes of trying to motivate people to take on the strategy.
Well, again, I make the point that if we pick up on one social media feed or a couple of news articles, that doesn't mean to say that a belief is widespread. And to go and mount a campaign on this concept that a lot of people think it's stopping them from breathing. I mean, I saw some weird thing in the US where one woman said it was, you're taking away God's breathing system by putting on a mask. Would be wrong, because I doubt very much whether that is the key reason. I think we've got to go and find out. Key to behavior change is to say what are people's real obstacles, not what you think their obstacles are. Go out there, find out from people why you're not wearing a mask. And as I said, my sense is that the key things are probably it's uncomfortable, and secondly, I don't think I'm going to get this. I feel fine. I'm young, and so the campaign should not be aimed at what we think are obstacles, but what the real obstacles are.
Right. Many sociologists and social scientists refer to the household as the unit of society. It feels like a bit of a stretch to go there, but what do these attitudes, do you think, unmask about how people are, I guess, responding to this at home? I mean, is there anything to read into that? Because that's where perceptions and attitudes start, surely.
Yes, well, I like you said unmasked, so let's stick with that. I think the key thing is that we are social animals. We like to behave like the people around us. We don't like to stick out. So, if we look at family, we look at community, if the people we respect, the people we like, the people we think are cool around us are not doing something, it becomes a lot harder for us to do it. So if the norm in my, social circle, in my community, it's, hey, why are you wearing a mask? That's not cool. Then it's very difficult to act against the norm. And in those cases, I think we've got to start to look at the sort of social influences in our communities. We've got to engage the social influences on social media. We've got to engage the leaders in whatever community or family you are and say, we've got to lead by example. And in that way, I think we've been very lucky with President Ramaphosa, very, opposite to President Trump. He has actually role modeled what the right behavior is. And I think those of us that are in leadership positions, either in community or in family or in organizations, what we do has a huge impact on what people see as normal.
And you speak about normal. Of course, coronavirus has disrupted that concept in and of itself too. Speak to us about, I guess, some of the social cultural hangovers that might, I guess, stifle efforts aimed at curbing the spread of COVID-19. What comes top of mind for me right now as I speak to you is the issues around funerals, for instance. It almost feels completely counterintuitive for many people, because of their cultural practices, not to have an outpouring of support in the form of physical presence, physically, I guess, comforting someone during a bereavement. How much of that do you think, is likely to inform the type of research we need to be doing into why people are actually not complying with these lockdown regulations?
Yeah, look, that's a really interesting question. We're fortunate to be working with the South African Council of Churches on an intervention. It's called Church in Action, which is trying to look at very specific drivers of transmission. And we know that funerals is a huge one. And as you say, for many, many people in this country, the concept of not going to the bereaved family and being in the house and then the funeral and then obviously the gathering after in large numbers in comforting people is completely countercultural. And so it is obviously one of the huge barriers. And I think, that's why we are working with the Council of Churches and other bodies to look at, how do we, sometimes it's not about completely changing behavior, it's about modifying behavior. So, instead of saying, well, you can't go to the house of the bereaved, or, you can't have a gathering after the funeral, is to maybe, or you can only have 50 people, is to see how you can modify that. So practicing using a mask when you go, not touching people. If you do touch people, then sanitizing your hands afterwards. So I think we've got to work in culture. We can't simply just say no, because that just doesn't work.
Absolutely. Well, you've done great work in the past. Looking forward to how this research comes about, and hopefully it'll sort of inform the ways through which we need to be approaching these complexities. Thank you very much for your time indeed. We appreciate it.